for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Palmer, and thank you to the panelists for being here today, and thank you for what you do in the IG community. It's very much appreciated. I think I'm the last questioner, so that's good news. I'm from the private sector, and seldom does a day go by in the federal government that I don't shake my head. I view Congress as the board of directors of a very large enterprise doing trillions of dollars of business, and I see the IG community as our auditors. So I want your opinions on some of these questions. I want to go to the 60,000-foot level if we could. First of all, is there accountability, in your opinion, in our agencies, in the federal government?
From my perspective, in our agencies, sometimes. It varies.
Thank you for your honesty. Is there accountability?
I think I would have to agree with my colleague, Mr. Horowitz, sometimes.
Department of Defense, accountability?
That's the exact words I wrote down here. It varies. It does. Sometimes there is and sometimes there's not.
In the second part, coming from the private sector of that question, I always would say in my companies, as evidenced by what? So if there is accountability, as evidenced by what? Where I'm heading here is, what percentage of federal employees are terminated every year? What percentage of management is terminated every year? Because I have sat here and asked witnesses about $370 million of an IT project that was scrapped after 4 years. $370 million of taxpayers' money. And I asked, did anyone lose their job? And the answer was, no. You gotta be kidding me. So, I mean, what percent of our workforce in the federal government is terminated?
I wouldn't know what percent of the federal workforce. We could speak anecdotally to what we've seen as IGs in our own agencies.
Okay, give me that answer. Is it enough?
People are not held accountable in a timely fashion sufficiently from my standpoint. And again, it varies. I've been here a few times for hearings about some of the issues with DEA, other parts of the department, giving bonuses to people who engaged in wrongdoing. As you recall, a couple of years ago.
Or the IRS rehiring people that on their job thing says do not rehire.
Right. What is that? What message does that send where you not only not take action against people, but you give them a reward, a bonus, an acknowledgement for the work they've done?
Only here in the federal government. Ms. Lerner or Mr. Fine, anything as far as termination percentages?
Well, no,
if you don't know the exact number, I mean, should there be more? How do we hold people accountable?
I don't know the exact number. In the Department of Defense, what often happens, though, is if you're not promoted, you're out. And so sometimes this does have consequences for bad evaluation reports, and then they do have to leave. But it does vary. It depends on the circumstances. I think you can't have one general comment about that.
And because I only have 2 minutes left, let's look at the positive side of this. And I often talk about incentives. And there's incentives in the private sector to save money, for example, in a corporation. Are there incentives in the federal government to save taxpayer money? Are there incentives to report? What's the incentive to report fraud? What's the incentive to report abuse, waste, fraud, and abuse? What are the incentives, though? I think they're upside down in the federal government compared to the private sector. Maybe we need more incentives. Maybe there needs to be monetary incentives for people to save the taxpayers' money. I'd like to have your thoughts on that.
Here's one incentive that is different in the federal government that I ask you to consider. If an agency does its work and doesn't spend all its money, then the next year the money gets taken away and their budget is cut, and they're not praised for performing their mission effectively with a lower budget. It is, oh, you really didn't need the money. And so there's an incentive to spend it all at the end of the year. That's a disincentive. That's a perverse incentive in my view. And we ought, and that's an issue that I think is important, that does differ a little bit from the private sector, where if you do the job without spending all the money, there's more praise than in the federal government.
Can you imagine if our federal employees got a small percentage as a bonus of the money they saved the American taxpayer? Can you imagine unleashing that across our federal agencies? How much waste we could reduce? Does that have merit? Does that idea have merit in the federal government, in your opinion? Anyone?
Go ahead.
Look, I think there's one of the challenges we face is a inability to reward our strongest performers. Other than we obviously have honor awards, We give other recognition out. We are able to give some recognition each year in terms of bonuses, but our bonus pools, just as an example, are about 1.5% or less of salaries. And compared to, from my time in the law firm world, that's a pretty small comparable number in terms of bonus.
Yeah, and my time is up, but I think we need to do a better job of holding people accountable and or terminating them. And we also need to do a better job of rewarding performers with incentives. My time is up, but thank you so much for what the IG community does. I yield back.